Hello, welcome. Welcome to Learning to Listen Conversations for Change. I'm your host, Joshua Sparrow at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center. To find out more about the Brazelton Touchpoint Center and Learning to Listen, just go to brazeltontouchpoints.org and click on Learn with Us and look for Learning to Listen in the Conversations section. To join the Brazelton Touchpoint Center Learning Network, look for that link in the chat. And to learn more about and register for Brazelton Touchpoint Center conversations, events, and trainings, click on the corresponding link in the chat. Today, we will be learning with Mayra Alvarez, President of the Children's Partnership, who will update us on immigration policy, about on-the-ground, real-time implementation of immigration policy and executive orders, and what is being and what can be done to mitigate the trauma. But first, a bit of information about today's Learning to Listen episode. More than 2,400 of us have registered for today's webinar. So please do feel free to tell us about you as you're doing, tell us where you're from, and what you do in the chat. Today, our superb interpreter, Maria Jose Gutierrez, joining us from Bogota, Colombia, will be simultaneously translating our webinar into Spanish. Thank you, Maria Jose. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls, then select Spanish. To mute the English in the background, select Mute Original Audio. La conversación de hoy será en español e inglés. En los controles de esta reunión, haga clic en Interpretación, haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Para escuchar solo el español, haga clic en Silenciar audio original. To turn closed captioning on, just click on the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the subtitles. Please use the chat feature if you have a comment to share or need help with a technical issue. And please put your questions for Mayra Alvarez in the Q&A box. Now, if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, please be sure you complete the feedback survey. That survey will open in your web browser when this webinar ends, and you will also receive a link to the survey when you get our thank you email from us tomorrow or in the next few days. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor, the Burke Foundation, and our Brazelton Touchpoint Center production team, Nelson Artavia, Ashley Gaddis, Suzanne Okasik, and Michael Accardi. And now, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Mayra Alvarez. Mayra is president of the Children's Partnership, a nonprofit advocacy organization working to advance child health equity by ensuring that all children have the resources and opportunities they need to grow up healthy and thrive. In 2021, Mayra was named by President Biden to the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force. In 2023, she was nominated by California Governor Gavin Newsom to serve on the Covered California Board of Directors, and in 2019 to serve on the Early Childhood Policy Council. Since 2017, Mayra has served on the California Behavioral Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, nominated by Attorney General Rob Bonta in 2021, and previously by then Attorney General Xavier Becerra in 2017. Prior to the Children's Partnership, Mayra completed a several-year set of assignments at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the administration of President Barack Obama. She served as the director of the State Exchange Group for the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and led a team responsible for supporting states in the establishment of health insurance marketplaces. Previously, Mayra served as the Associate Director for the HHS Office of Minority Health, where she led the coordination of that office's work related to the Affordable Care Act, community health workers, and language access. Prior to this role, Mayra served as Director of Public Health Policy in the Office of Health Reform at U.S. Health and Human Services, where she had primary oversight responsibility for coordinated and timely implementation of the public health, prevention, and healthcare workforce policy provisions in the Affordable Care Act. Before joining the Obama administration, Mayra served as a legislative assistant for Senator Richard Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, and for then Congresswoman Hilda Salas, Democrat of California. She began her professional career as a David A. Winston Health Policy Fellow in the office of then Senator Barack Obama, who was at that point Democrat from Illinois. She is originally from outside San Diego, California, and is the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants. Mayra, we know you are more sought after than ever these days, and so we just can't thank you enough for joining us today. And I thought we might start with some level setting about immigration and about children and families who have immigrated to the United States before we move on to talk about what's happening to them now, and finally, what is within our reach that we can do to protect their health and mental health, or at least to mitigate the harm. So again, thank you, Mayra, for joining us today, and uh, tell us what you'd like us to know as we start off our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Josh, for this opportunity to join you and to join this incredible community of advocates, family members, community leaders to have this important conversation. I am truly honored. I wear many hats in these conversations. Absolutely, I am wearing the hat of a nonprofit leader, trying to play our small part in ensuring we're educating the public and policymakers about the importance of immigration policy and its impact on the well-being of children. But I'm also wearing a very important hat of an advocate for families like mine, families that have challenges with the immigration system, that have called this country home for decades, that have raised their children here, that have contributed to making our state strong and incredible. And so I know this conversation is both professionally connected for many of us and personally connected to many of us. So I'm honored to be in conversation with you and in community with you in this work.
Thank you, Mayra. So maybe tell us a little bit about families who have immigrated to this country. I know there's been a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and so I think it would be helpful if you could just a little bit about who these families are.
Sure, absolutely. Our immigrant community here in the United States is incredibly diverse, coming from all over the world. And if you look at our population of children and who children in the United States are, over 18 million of them are part of immigrant families. 1 in 4 children have at least one immigrant parent. And if you look at certain states across the country, states like California, almost half of all children have at least one immigrant parent. So we know that immigrant families are an incredible part of our communities. We also know that children that are part of immigrant families, the overwhelming majority of them, 94% of children under the age of 6, are US born citizens. They're overwhelmingly US citizens. And we know that their parents, when they are immigrants, they've been living in our country. The majority of those parents have been living in this country for over a decade. When we look at the diversity of the population of immigrants, we see about half of them are from Latina or Latinx communities. About 17% are from Asian American and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities, and 10% are from Black communities. These are rough estimates. And we also know that about 5 million children under the age of 18 have an undocumented parent. So there is so many children that are impacted by immigration policy directly because of the makeup of their families, and also many more children that are impacted by these policies and these changes because of their neighborhood, because of their classroom settings. And immigrants, again, are coming from all over the world. We know that many immigrants are coming from Mexico and Central America. That's who has accounted for most border crossings in these last few decades. But that pattern shifted somewhat in 2014, and this is according to US Border Patrol data. We also saw that there were greater immigrant populations from Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, as well as Venezuela since about 2021, and Haiti, Cuba, Nicaragua. But again, they're immigrant families coming from all over the world, again, seeking to come to the United States for any variety of reasons.
And tell us a little bit about the variety of reasons why people are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's important to consider the circumstances in which people leave their home countries, whether it's political instability or economic instability, frankly, fleeing persecution, fleeing violence, gang violence. There's a number of different reasons depending on the countries of origin, which is why there are many pathways for immigrants coming to the United States, whether it's pathways of asylum status or other visas available through our employment system. There are a number of opportunities or there have been a number of opportunities in order to ensure that immigrants can enter the United States. And then there are also those that may not have those opportunities and seek to come to the United States because it's the option that they think is absolutely necessary for their family. And this is something that I think is important to consider when we know families are coming or sending their children to the United States because it's the only option available to them in order to keep their child safe. And I think for anyone who knows a child, for any parent or caregiver, that process and journey and the risk and fear and true danger that that process can take is it's almost a decision that we can't imagine having to make, but we do out of the safety and commitment to our children. So there's a number of reasons why people are coming to the United States. And it's important that that is the essence of what this country has been. Since its inception, it has been a land of opportunity. It has been a land of welcoming people seeking the American dream for any number of reasons. And that has shifted. And it's a conversation that's contributing to the fear, that's contributing to the confusion that we're talking about today.
So we'll come back to your very important point about the multiple experiences of trauma that so many people who make their way here have experienced in their home countries, which have often been the reasons why they've left, uh, on top of which are layered the traumas that they so often experience on their way here. We'll come back to that when we talk about the impact of the trauma that they are experiencing now once they're here. But I wanted to go back and flip the question a little bit to have you talk a little bit about why historically the United States has considered immigration as important to the United States um, for its for its own reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is no doubt that immigrants are incredible contributors to our society, to our communities, whether that's culturally, whether that's economically, they are an incredible contributor to the success of this country. Arguably, economists have said that immigrants are who helped our country actually get through the COVID public health emergency and allowed us to really have one of the strongest economies post-COVID shutdown. It was immigrants who were often on the front lines, doing the things that kept our day-to-day activities going. With all due credit to all the first responders in our healthcare field, there were also a number of folks on the front line, at the grocery stores, at gas stations, at car washes, at cleaning our houses, making our food. There are a number of particularly immigrant families that have been part of these lower income job sectors that really truly make our other jobs possible. And that is a huge contributor to the economic well-being of our country, an economic driver of our country. And I think that is something that, again, policymakers understand, economists understand. Our workforce is heavily dependent on immigrants and the contributions of immigrants at all levels. Again, looking at our blue collar jobs, our lower income job sectors, but also there's a number of visa opportunities for immigrant communities in the tech field and other spaces that really leverage the specialization of many immigrant communities. All to say that the United States is thriving because of our immigrant communities. The United States is the economic powerhouse of the world because of our immigrant communities. And recognizing those contributions and how those contributions impact all of us is something that we all have to talk about and really make clear to the public, to policymakers, to ensure that as we move forward immigration policy, that we be humane and that we be just in our approach.
So I guess then the question is, what happened?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It really is. I want to say there's not one thing that happened. There are a number of factors that have happened, right? And I think in particular, it's disheartening to hear this administration really point to immigrants as a scapegoat for challenges that are not the responsibility of any one group of people. And I think when we think about the United States and we think about our fundamental values of inclusion and community and liberty and justice, that means that we need to have a community of folks that understand each other and support each other and contribute to each other's well-being. And we've moved away from those fundamental values in the rhetoric and in, again, the demonization of who immigrants are today. It's been a real frightening transition and to hear this language evolve. And I think it's coming from a place of fear. I think it's coming from a place of fear as our communities become more diverse, as our children now across the United States are majority children of color. The reality is that we are becoming a more diverse country that is thriving because of its diversity. And there are certain folks in power that do not want that to happen. And so our responsibility, mine as an advocate, is to ensure that we are making clear what the reality of the contributions and how interconnected our lives are with our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Uh, so I think part of what you're getting at is the scarcity mindset. When there's this sense that the pie is too small for everyone, um, then there's this fear, and you talked about fear, that there won't be enough slices to go around. I've just put into the chat a number of quotations from an article for which I put in the link, which lays out the ways in which people who've immigrated to this country have actually made the pie bigger,
Mhm.
made the pie bigger. So I think part of our longer term work is to support a shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. That there's more than enough to go around, even though for lots of people that's not the day-to-day experience. And also to understand that together with people who've immigrated here, we can make the pie bigger, as has happened, as this data demonstrates. So let's now go to what's happening now, and I think we might want to start with the period 2016 to 2020, because you and I first spoke on Learning to Listen in 2020, and folks can tune into that recording on our YouTube page, and then we can come to what's happening in 2025.
Sure, absolutely. I think if we go back to the first Trump administration, and we think about see the pictures of children in cages, if we think about the comments that were made during the presidential race about who Mexicans were, and it was and is, let me be clear, a scary time for many immigrant communities and for many of us who are proud to be American, for many of us who are proud to be part of this country because of its welcoming nature of who immigrants are and the contributions that they have made. Uh, and we saw, nearly 4,000 children separated from their families. But even if we did not know someone who was directly impacted by family separation or by immigration policies, we saw those impacts in our classrooms, in the dialogue that we were hearing, in the chilling effect that we saw amongst children and families not accessing healthcare services, not accessing social services, not attending everyday activities like going to the park or going to the grocery store for fear of immigration enforcement. That is a reality that does nothing positive for childhood development. And that is what we were seeing in 2016 to 2020. And at the same time, I want to give credit to the incredible energy and commitment of families and advocates and community leaders and policymakers that really rallied to push back against many of the proposed policy changes where we could, to push back against changes to public charge, for example, that really laid the groundwork for strengthening these policies for the future. And I want to be mindful that those 4 years, I hope we're able to galvanize many of us to really see immigration policy as a child health issue, to better understand these policies through the lens of children, and in doing so, perhaps take a more humane approach to immigration policy that can better understand the experiences of children. And that's a continued battle that we're a part of, to really frame these issues from that perspective, in order to again strengthen the sort of immigration policy we move forward. And we can talk about the administration today, but I also want to be mindful that we did have a Biden administration since that time, and there were serious concerns as well, right, with the work that we need to do in order to improve our immigration policy. That is not lost on me or any other person that works on policy in any way, shape, or form. We have serious work to do to reform our immigration system. It is long overdue. There is a backlog of over 3 million immigration cases, right? So really recognizing the work that needs to be done, while also appreciating the intention that we need to take in order to do that in the most humane way possible.
Yes, I think part of what may have been between the lines of the last bit of what you said is that I think Obama actually deported more people than Trump did in his first administration, and more people than Biden did. And that in the at least the last year or last months of Biden's administration, there were more deportations than have occurred month to month in the Trump administration. Um,
Yes.
so maybe you can tell us now about what's happening. Here we are in 2025, executive orders. um, challenges with executive orders, inconsistencies with legislation, et cetera. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think, this time around, the Trump administration is only building on what they attempted to do in Trump 1.0. You named it. There's been a number of executive orders put forward, targeting immigrant communities, changing immigration policies and regulations in order to deter immigrants from coming to the United States. I think there's over 150 executive orders that have been issued that pertain to immigrants in some way, shape, or form, really inundating the American people with these changes that seek to back up their claims that immigrants are to blame for many of the challenges that we are facing. And I want to talk specifically about some of them, like, and many of the executive orders that have been put forward have been already stopped, right? So like there was one protective order to weaponize legal aid funding by issuing a stop work order to cut federal support for organizations providing legal services to unaccompanied migrant children. That was rescinded by the courts. But again, these are efforts that seek to stop some core services and supports for unaccompanied migrant children, that honestly seems more cruel than actually purposeful, because it's so important to have legal representation. Similarly, the Trump administration dismissed 20 immigration judges. They rescinded guidance on language access. They've terminated the Friends of the Court program, again, which provides these legal supports to unaccompanied minors. We know that unaccompanied minors are 300% more likely to obtain relief from an immigration judge when they have representation. So there's direct correlation between legal services and the well-being of those children with that legal representation. So there's also new policies for sponsors under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, adding these administrative barriers that are really unnecessary and that aren't grounded in actual information that requires these additional administrative barriers, such as fingerprint background checks or presenting original documents instead of copies or stricter verification standards. These are all intentional administrative barriers that we know limit access to important public programs for families. Across the board, administrative barriers are limiting public access to programs that families in general need and have a right to access. We've also seen the return of family detention. Family detention centers have a well-documented history of abuse, of negligence. There's well-documentation around inadequate medical and mental health care, inappropriate disciplinary tactics. The impacts of family detention on children's well-being have shown incredibly psychologically damaging effects on children, everything from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, amongst other problems. And what we don't want to see that sort of behavior for any person, any child, and we're seeing the return of that family detention. But we also saw the rescinding of the protected areas policy. And this is something that has been in place off and on in some way, shape, or form since 2011. So really thinking about how we are limiting where immigration and customs enforcement or Customs and Border Patrol can perform their activities. So thinking about not having their presence near safe spaces, near hospitals, near schools or childcare centers, near houses of worship or food pantries, or even, here in California, when we saw the Los Angeles fires, near disaster relief efforts. The intention being that we want to make sure we create spaces where people of all backgrounds feel safe seeking those services. So the rescinding of that policy clearly could have devastating consequences for immigrant families and their children. Again, this chilling effect of deterring families from accessing services, from seeking out disaster relief, from going to school or going to their childcare center, and again, from carrying out those everyday activities. We are seeing this intentional fear in our communities that as a result is going to have these detrimental impacts that we saw under Trump 1.0, that we saw, children not showing up at school, that we saw children impacted and their health and well-being impacted. Multiple studies have demonstrated that. And so moving back towards this policy where we are prioritizing, where we're not prioritizing children and families and impacting children and families directly, that's what we want to get back to. That's what we want to do. Because when you think about, across the political spectrum, families are being deported, that there is immigration enforcement, there is an approach that doesn't need to be demonizing these communities and purposely instilling fear in our communities. That is not who we that is not who we want to be when it comes to our community as an American people. That is not who we want to be, and where we need to steer away from. And that's just a sample. There are so many executive orders, and also I want to be clear. There are also these broader executive orders that speak to who we are as the United States, an English only policy, like not recognizing the diversity of languages that our communities have, and frankly, the incredible addition of that language brings to brain development, to our ability to communicate with communities, to be part of this global society. Moving us away from those core values of who we are. It's frightening to watch, and we're seeing this over and over again, and it's having real detrimental impacts on children that we want to make sure we are able to mitigate in any way, shape, or form. The last thing I want to say is these actions that the administration is taking, they're really deliberately designed to instill that fear, to prolong detention, to delay the unification of family members or sponsors, and really to push children, push families toward this deportation without their fair chance of being heard. And that isn't what these policies are set up to do. And thankfully, we have many lawyers and the courts that are pushing back against this administration's attempt to, bulldoze through these policies. But that's a timely process, and it's not fast enough to stop the communication, the narrative that is being driven, and that is, again, causing fear, confusion, and real detrimental health impacts for children across the country.
So there are lots of really important comments in the chat and lots of questions. I want to bring a couple of them to you. One of them says that we need to be focused on what we can do. And so I want to reassure folks that we're going to get to that. That was where we were going to land. Before we get there, there are a set of questions about what ICE can do. Can ICE get inside a high school? Can it get inside a public library? Can it detain minors?
Yeah, these are great questions. And I know, I'm sure many of us are very familiar with Know Your Rights trainings and ensuring that we are preparing ourselves. And I want to say that information is power. Information is power. And we have the opportunity to support our immigrant communities by being informed ourselves. We cannot make the assumption that everyone is carrying around a red card. But for those of us that are connected, for those of us that have the privilege of being in these spaces, how do we show up as the best allies? How do we ensure that folks in our communities know we're there, watching and supporting them in the process? And so those Know Your Rights trainings are particularly impactful for schools and childcare centers to be informed of when and when ICE can actually come onto the property, having a warrant, having a judicial warrant that is signed. These are all important elements of knowledge that are so necessary in order to push back against this narrative that ICE can do what it wants, or Border Patrol can do what it wants. It's so important to know that. And I try to equate it as disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness. Again, I'm from California. Growing up, we were always thinking about earthquakes and making sure that we were prepared for earthquakes. And we would have an earthquake pack that we would pack with food, and we would be informed, and we knew to like stand under our desk and be prepared. This is not a natural disaster. What we are experiencing is a man-made disaster. We are experiencing an intentional man-made disaster by this administration to instill fear in our communities. So how do we best support our communities in being prepared? Because I'm mindful that we don't want to cause panic, but we do want to ensure preparation. And just as we prepare for natural disasters as best we can, let's prepare our communities for man-made disasters. And I know we'll talk more about that, but I think shifting this conversation so that families can be prepared, so that we ourselves can be prepared as allies, as neighbors, as family members, I think will position us all better. And it's made a difference. We know it has made a difference in keeping the families safe and keeping families informed, and really making sure that we're doing all we can to protect them.
You mentioned red card, so maybe you can, if there are folks who aren't familiar with that term, you can explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. So know your rights cards, or red cards are available to families. A number of legal organizations, community organizations have access to these red cards that really walk people through knowing your rights and being able to talk through what the process is. We can order them through the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Again, it's important information to have to ensure families are aware of their rights, of being able to know how to push back against these red cards. Like folks, and these red cards have a lot of text, but they're intentional in informing people about their rights, about not opening the door if an immigration agent is knocking, not answering questions unless you want your lawyer there, not signing anything without first speaking to a lawyer. These are, again, like important information to protect themselves and for us to be able to protect others. There's a number of resources available to people. And I know we're dropping in the chat that people can print themselves, but can also be ordered, again, in order to ensure that families have the information that they need and that they can exercise their rights in real situations.
So one of the comments in the chat was about how there now are attempts to detain and even deport people who are here with valid visas, who even have green cards. And I wanted to know if you could comment a little bit on that, because I think it fits with what you were saying earlier about this sort of campaign of fear and terror.
That's exactly right. I think there is confusion, and especially when this administration is encouraging local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE and with Customs and Border Patrol. It really does lend itself to, should I always be carrying, my green card? Should I be carrying my information? Should I be carrying my passport if I look a certain way, right? Because racial profiling is absolutely real and is happening in our communities across this country. And again, knowing our rights when it comes to these instances is so important to push back against these types of questions. There are communities across the country in different states that have different state policies that are not allowing local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE, for example. In California, we have something called the California Values Act. Other states may have other policies as well that, again, limit that sort of cooperation with ICE and Border Patrol. And so, again, this information allows us to be able to push back against that. But I think you bring up a really good point that there is there are mistakes being made. And again, it impinges on our own civil liberties as Americans. And all of us across the political spectrum should be gravely concerned that that is happening, that we are not respecting the rights of US citizens, of naturalized citizens, of legal permanent residents, because of the confusion that this administration is causing. And again, across the political spectrum, we should all be concerned with that.
So let's move on to what we can do. And I think to prepare us for that, we might want to have you say a little bit, anything that you haven't yet said about the kinds of psychological harm that children and families are experiencing, because I think what we can do is partly to address that. And let me just first say, as an aside, that there are lots of really useful resources linked in the chat. And somebody asked if they would be available. We will put them in our thank you email that will go out to everybody who registered in the next day or two. But let's hear a little bit about the kinds of psychological trauma that's layered on top of the trauma during the journey to get here and the trauma that caused people to leave their home countries in the beginning, so that we can then move on to what it is that is within our reach to do.
Absolutely. I mean, there is so much. You nailed it, Josh. I mean, there is the trauma that ensues as a result of the journey in getting to this country, let alone navigating these systems and risking their own safety and well-being by attempting to make this journey happen. There's also the psychological trauma of fearing if your parent is going to be detained or deported. Kids often don't know the difference between a US citizen, Mexican American, or a green card holder and an undocumented individual. What they see is their family is part of an immigrant community, and they have questions and may not have answers to them. So that is psychological trauma. That worry, that hesitation, that anxiety is something that our children are grappling with unnecessarily as a result of again, the fear that this administration is instilling. And also, when we think about our parents, our immigrant parents, our immigrant families who are also trying to figure out how to navigate this new environment and who are stressed out as a result of that, that also has implications on child well-being. Children notice. Children are they're watching us, they're listening to us, whether we want to believe it or not. They are paying attention and are holding on to that as they're observing that, right? And this is evident in research we've done with immigrant families, even in a state like California that people point to as being incredibly progressive. It is not shielding our immigrant families from that fear, from those psychological impacts. Research that our partners at CLASS did with early childhood providers and children, young children, and the psychological impacts of feeling like they need to be prepared if their families are separated. That is happening, and that it will only get worse if this administration continues with these behaviors. But I also want to note that even families who may not be directly impacted or children that are watching are impacted as well. There was an incredibly heartbreaking story of a young girl, 11 years old, who died by suicide because of the bullying that she received over her family's immigration status. And I will say her name because she deserves to be known. She deserves to be uplifted. Jocelyn Rojo Carranza, 11 years old, because of this bullying. Rest in peace, rest in power. This idea that children are feeling the weight of who their family is, questioning, instead of playing with dolls or playing softball. Like it's infuriating and incredibly heartbreaking that any family has to live through that any mom or dad or caregiver has to bury their child because of what we see this administration stoking the fear. And we want to prevent that from ever happening. We want to prevent that fear, that those mental health impacts, the physical health impacts from happening. And that's part of the responsibility that we have together to ensure that we're doing all we can. The levels of anxiety and stress in these formative years, it's going to have serious, long-lasting consequences as those young children transition into adulthood, as we look to them to be our future workforce here in this country. That's who our children are today, children of immigrants, right? And I think it's important to consider again how interconnected this conversation is with all of us as we strive to create a more prosperous community for our economy for all of us.
And just to add to that, there are ways in which the trauma ripples out and ripples in. There are families with what is sometimes referred to as mixed documentation status,
Mhm.
families with grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, and uncles, where different family members have different documentation status. So that for the family members who may have green cards or may have visas or may have citizenship, they're still connected to family members who may be detained or may be deported. So it's a larger group of people who are living in fear, and families may be bringing their children to child care centers, or they may work in child care centers and they may be bringing their families to schools or to clinics and hospitals, or they may work there. So it ripples all the way around. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you raise a really good point because um, there is this tendency to say, well, we came the legal way. Why can't everyone else? Right. And I think that that is a false narrative that we are claiming that this process for becoming a U.S. citizen is so easy to follow. There are financial barriers, there are administrative barriers, there are a number of barriers. And again, there's over 3 million cases in backlog that is only exacerbated by terminating immigration judges, right? Like we're only making the problem worse. So I think that's the reality for many families in this country, this mixed status families, because that process looks so different for everyone, and it takes time and it takes resources that really not everyone has access to. So these are all challenges that are connected, that are contributing to this broken immigration system that we have. There isn't anyone that is saying our immigration system is working great. No, there is clear recognition and shared commitment to reforming the immigration system and finding, pathways to legalization for the undocumented, for folks that are here with DACA status that is in limbo right now, for folks that are grappling with trying to ensure that they're able to contribute to this country in the way they want to, the country that many of them have called home. So I want to emphasize that because it is so challenging, and we have to make sure that there is a clear understanding of that challenge rather than making these false assumptions.
So in the time that remains, let's talk about what we can do. And there was a question about what your recommendations are for talking with parents about how they can talk with their children about this uncertainty. And so let's talk about talking with children about this whole issue and about mental health.
Absolutely. I think there are a number of things that we can do. Just in thinking and reading through some of the introductions of who's with us as part of this conversation, we have a variety of folks that I would consider providers that are either teachers or childcare providers or Head Start providers that have an opportunity to create these welcoming environments for immigrant families. And that can look a number of different ways. Our partners at CLASP have a safe spaces guide that enables childcare centers, for example, to know how to create safe spaces. What are some of the tangible steps that you can take to create a welcoming environment? What are signs that you can put on? What are conversations you can host and invite people into? Again, many immigrant families, there are there are only certain areas or certain spaces that they are considered trusted. Often our childcare center, our school, those are critical spaces that allow for connection and understanding. And so making sure we're supporting our schools and childcare centers and becoming safe spaces for immigrant families, for all children, let me be clear, but for immigrant families in this environment is particularly impactful. And again, there is support available to folks to walk through those processes and be able to support our educators, our administrators in making that possible. I also see that there are a number of school districts across the country that are intentionally passing resolutions that are able to support their local school districts and ensuring they're moving forward these policies. Again, this is not only federal policy that has implications, it's state policy and it's local policy that has an opportunity to demonstrate to our immigrant families, to speak to our immigrant families that you are welcome here. You are part of our community. We love you. We embrace you. And these providers have an opportunity to contribute to that. But additionally, when we think about like us as parents, as caregivers, as neighbors, how do we create spaces to talk about what is happening? There was some chat where families have children who are not immigrants, but who come home and say, is my friend safe? Should I be worried about my friend who is part of an immigrant family? First of all, again, it's heartbreaking that our children are raising these questions and have to grapple with these questions, but it's the reality of what's happening today. And there's an opportunity to have age-appropriate conversations with our children about our immigration system, about how broken that immigration system, about the history of immigration and why it's added so much beauty and diversity and strength to this country. That education starts now with our kids at every age, with the books we're reading, with the shows we watch, with the events that we attend. There is an opportunity for us to really expose our children to become more inclusive, more racially just as we're growing up. And that's a responsibility that all of us can be a part of. But I also think it's important to consider, and especially in many of our communities where we don't talk about mental health, how do we talk about mental health? How do we create a space that allows our parents to talk about what are the mental health implications of the dialogue that we are seeing, of the comments that we are hearing, the policies that are showing up on the front page of the paper. How do we talk about that and equip ourselves? And I know, we're dropping resources in the chat, but I think empowering ourselves as parents, as caregivers, to be able to have those conversations. And part of that, if I can be honest, starts with ourselves as adults. Are we prepared to have those conversations? Are we able to are we comfortable with our own capacity to grapple with our own mental health and be able to be the best adult for our children? Josh, you talk a lot about, putting our own masks on before putting our child's mask on when we're on an airplane. This is part of that, making sure that we are taking care of ourselves and creating the spaces for our families. And then I touched on this earlier, but another very practical piece of advice is that preparation for this man-made disaster in the form of family preparedness plans for immigrant families to ensure that there is a child care contact, that there is someone that people could call, that your community knows that you are connected. That's incredibly important. And again, there are resources from the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, from NILC, from CLASP that are able to uplift this information for families. And of course, I have to again reiterate knowing our rights and making sure that we are able to be an advocate, if not for ourselves and our families, for our neighbors, for our community members, again, to ensure that we are protecting people as much as possible. And I'm very mindful that it seems these problems are insurmountable. There is a lot happening. There is a lot of scary things for immigrant communities, for low-income families. Again, for those of us that are proud to call this country home, we wonder what's happening. And to think about what's one thing you can do. May not be world changing, but your one drop added to this puddle is going to make a difference. And I think do something is more than doing nothing. And we all have the opportunity to do that, particularly in trying to create a more just, a more equitable, a more inclusive world. And I just in seeing this chat, I'm so honored to be a part of this community that is seeking to do that for our babies, for our little kids, for our big kids, and for all of us that, again, are part of this community.
And so just doing the thing that you can do, whatever it is within your reach, is also part of taking care of yourself, because it feels even worse to not know what you can do or to feel like you're not doing anything. There was a comment which is also related to the oxygen mask metaphor about what safeguards is your organization taking so that you don't get shut down, talking about protecting yourself, right?
I appreciate that. I appreciate that question. Thank you so much. And it is an interesting time to work at a nonprofit organization where there is greater attention on who nonprofits are and what's the work that we're doing and what's the language that we use. We I don't know if I should say thankfully, we actually do not receive federal funding. So we have not been directly impacted. But we are aware that so many in our community have. So many have been in limbo as they wonder if their federal contract's going to be reinstated or have lost contracts. And as a result of that, are limiting the amount of services that they're able to offer families. So that's where we can step in as advocates to try and push back on what's happening at the federal level, being part of public comments, being part of these coalitions that are able to raise our voice and pushing back, but also making sure we're doing what we can at the state and local level to demonstrate a different way, to demonstrate that this administration does not reflect the values and the commitments that many of us across this country continue to hold towards our immigrant communities, towards our diverse communities. And that is what we are striving to do, again, through educating our partners and being in community with them, through advocating for additional state investments and supporting legal services for immigrant communities, for strengthening access to public services for immigrant communities. These are all ways, at least in our state, but I know across the country, folks are leaning into so many different ways of connection and community building. This idea of mutual aid, how are we supporting each other at the local level to really think through what families need at this time? And that I think speaks to what many of us who are parents know is absolutely necessary, that it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to take care of our community. And we are all connected and are part of that village. And so recognizing the opportunity to do more is, again, I feel privileged and honored to be a part of that. And I know it's what's going to see us through. It's what's going to see us through this 4 years and hopefully into a better future for all of us.
Thank you so much, Mayra Alvarez. There are so many more um, urgent, pressing questions that I'm afraid we won't have time to get to, but I think folks know where to find you. And you and I will both be back on Tuesday, April 1st, uh, doing a panel on the same topic for the campaign for grade level reading. That's Tuesday, April 1st. So come back and bring your questions to us then. The campaign for grade level reading puts on a webinar every week, and this one will be about children and families who have immigrated to the US and what we can do. And you will receive more information about that in our email that will go out to you tomorrow or in the next couple of days, which will also include the links in the chat for resources that you've been asking about and a link to the recording of this webinar. And our next Learning to Listen conversation will be on Wednesday, April 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, with child and adolescent psychiatrist, author, speaker, educator, and consultant, Dr. Scott Leibowitz. And he will be with us for a conversation on learning to listen to transgender youth and their families. Thank you all for joining us today and for the work that you do and the commitment and passion with which you do it.